Welcome back to the show. Today we have Phil Nadel. He's the founder and managing director at Forefront Venture Partners. Phil, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you back on the show. You did the radio version, and I don't know, selfishly, I'm fascinated by all the stuff that you guys have invested in. I've had some of the companies that you've actually invested in on the show, and I figure let's have the man who's running the show on the show to talk about how Forefront kind of does their investing. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. Was born and lived the first part of my childhood in New York, but my parents got wise early on, and we moved down to South Florida where it's much warmer.
Sure.
So went to high school in South Florida, then went to college in Philadelphia, and quickly moved right back to South Florida when I was done with college, and I've been here ever since.
Fair enough. So walk me through your career up until Forefront Ventures, because you have an interesting journey.
Well, so when all I ever wanted to do, I went to business school, and all I ever wanted to do in business school was start my own business. And graduating from college, that's what I did. And I've started several businesses since then, and really never worked for anyone else. So serial entrepreneur. I've had several exits in the publishing business, in the finance business, in some online marketing businesses. I've had exits, and I think kind of a little bit about the story where when I had a particularly large exit, some of my relatives and friends had approached me about investing in their companies, advising their companies and whatnot, which I did to a limited extent. And in doing that, I kind of learned a lot. I learned a lot about, not necessarily that it's such a good idea to invest with friends and family members, but learned a lot about sort of advising companies that are startups and not necessarily running the show myself, which was a different role for me. But I became very interested in investing in startups. And so that sort of spread to not just people I knew, but, the circle grew from there, and I was being approached by people I didn't know necessarily. So after a little while of more of this kind of informal startup investing, I made it a full-time occupation and started investing just in startups full-time. I still own a few companies, but I'm not actively involved in running them.
Got you. Okay. No, that makes sense. So what made you actually go full into Forefront Ventures, and what exactly is it?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because Forefront Venture Partners is not sort of a typical VC fund. We are a syndicate. We operate through the AngelList platform, which, for your viewers who aren't familiar with AngelList, it's the largest angel investing online platform. And they have a feature on AngelList called syndicates, which means that investors like me can share our deal flow, share the deals that we're investing in with other people who want to invest. So when we make an investment, we make that investment available to our syndicate investors on the exact same terms that we invest in. So they get the sort of benefits of the deal sourcing that we do, the due diligence, the negotiating, the legal work, all of the vetting, all of that. They get to take advantage of it and invest on the same terms. So it actually works very well. We've so far syndicated 48 companies and over the last 5+ years, and it's a great model. And what the companies that we invest in, what they love about it is they're getting 100, 150 individual investors into their company, but they're not getting them all on the cap table. It's one entry on the cap table. So it just makes it much, much cleaner for them. And the benefit is they get the help of the assistance of all of these people, right? So if they're in a business where they could use some introductions into potential customers, for example, they put the word out to our syndicate investors, and before you know it, they're getting 6, 8, 10 emails with introductions. And it just works really well. It's a great mechanism for them to get assistance with growing their business, again, without sort of cluttering up their cap table. So it's a great model, the syndicate model, and it's worked well for us, for our syndicate investors, and for the companies we invest in.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's an interesting way that I think not a lot of investment companies actually do things. So I think that's really interesting that you guys do it that way. But I'm curious to know, is there specific verticals that you guys focus in, or are you kind of generic?
Well, we're generic. We're sort of sector agnostic to a degree. We'll look at all kinds of different business models, but within that, we focus on companies that are post-revenue. So they're already generating revenue, which automatically disqualifies a whole bunch of startups, right? Those pre-revenue companies, pre-product companies, that's not our area. We also focus on companies that are capital efficient. So any companies that are involved with like a heavy R&D expense or a big brick and mortar development expense, anything that's very capital intensive, we're not going to be interested in that. So that automatically, again, disqualifies a lot of types of businesses. But other than that, we are agnostic in terms of the industry and also, at least within the U.S., in terms of geography. We invest in a few other countries as well, but within the U.S., we're certainly geographically agnostic, which is, it brings a lot of interesting benefits to be looking beyond just the major venture capital hubs like Silicon Valley. You get much more reasonable valuations.
Sure. Well, and I think too, sometimes you get maybe more innovative companies or just as innovative companies outside of Silicon Valley as you potentially would in Silicon Valley, but they're a lot cheaper, right?
Yes. I mean, there are certainly innovative companies everywhere,
Sure.
right? I mean,
yeah, okay.
And to limit yourself to just Silicon Valley or just New York or whatever, it's just too constricting, and I don't see any reason for it. And to your point, yes, we get better values, better valuations typically when we're investing outside of those hubs. So
Sure.
yes, I think it makes sense.
So
There are some challenges, of course, to those secondary markets for the companies. There are challenges in sourcing the right talent, the right personnel. But it's becoming easier and easier, especially with all the remote workforces that we have today.
yeah, no, that makes sense. So walk me through maybe some general guidelines. I know that you have them on your website, but of things that people need to do before they actually even send you a pitch deck or their documentation, before you'll even consider them. I know you mentioned they need to be pre-revenue post-revenue. Sorry. Yeah. But what other guidelines do you guys look for before you'll even consider investing in them?
Well, they have to be addressing a sizable market, right? They have to, well, first, they have to be solving a real problem or a real pain point for their customers. That's number one. They have to have a good founding team who's got some experience, hopefully a well-rounded team. So whether we do invest in solo founders, but it's better if there is a team of 2 or 3 founders with complementary skills. So addressing a real problem, a sizable market, it's got to be sizable enough that ultimately we can get a reasonable exit out of it. They have to really understand their numbers. That's really critical for us. I can't tell you how many companies approach me without understanding their numbers. They don't know what are the drivers in their business, what's going to help them to grow or prevent them from growing. So that's critically important. And just having at least the first stages of product market fit and some indication that there's product market fit and that they've identified early on some potentially scalable marketing channels, customer acquisition channels. We like to see that as well. So that gives you, a few things. But on our website, we sort of list some more.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. So do you maybe want to highlight a few of the companies that you've invested in or maybe had exits on? And I guess maybe, are you trying to get every company you invest in to an exit, or are you fine maybe just letting them run and just kind of keep going? Or is the goal to kind of eventually sell them off?
Yeah, the goal of sort of every VC is to either go public or sell, or for the
Okay.
companies to sell. A lot of times you find that companies that are modestly successful, they're growing but slowly. They're making some money but not a lot. Those are the ones that end up staying private for a long time and just throw off dividends. That's not really what we're looking for, but that's certainly a better outcome than a company that goes out of business.
Sure.
So we'll take that. But really the goal is for an exit, yes, for a sale.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, but yeah, so I mean, we've had so many great portfolio companies, and you're asking me to highlight a few. It's like trying to pick my favorite child, which I can't do. But yeah, I'll just mention a few. One of our most successful portfolio companies is called Grove Collaborative.
Okay.
It's an online e-commerce marketplace for non-toxic home products for the home, cleaning products and laundry products and things like that. They're doing exceedingly well.
That's great.
We've had several exits. Recently, a company called PaintSen, which is an online platform for connecting people who need painting of their homes or businesses with contractors who do the painting. We're investors in a company called Wanderoo, which is like the Expedia for ground transportation, right?
Very
so
cool.
I think, I didn't know this before I invested, but there are more bus trips taken in the U.S. per year than there are airplane trips.
Yeah, I had no idea either until you mentioned it, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it's easy to book, relatively easy these days to book an airplane trip. But if you try to book bus travel, it's very difficult. Firstly, there are a lot more bus companies than there are airlines.
Sure.
And their websites are terrible. They're clunky. It's hard to book online. The information is all over the place. Wanderoo consolidates it all and makes it very easy to buy a ticket for a bus ride. So that's been a great company. They've been very successful too. And one we just closed recently is a company called Chargeback, which helps businesses manage their credit card disputes internally. So that's a real hassle to manage for a lot of e-commerce businesses, is managing their credit card disputes. A big company has a lot of them, as you can imagine. It's very labor intensive and time intensive. And Chargeback helps them to manage that process and makes it much more efficient. So those are a few of them.
No, that's interesting. So I'm curious then, so say you invest in my company and I'm making money, and the goal is that we're both agree we're going to sell this thing. At what point, how do you know when, the company is ready to be sold, and how do you find a buyer?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the best case scenario, and this happens a lot, potential buyers are approaching the company.
Okay.
And most, in a really good company, most of the time it happens too early. Buyers start approaching them too early. And it can be very tempting for an entrepreneur to sell too early. But usually it's a very organic process. Either potential buyers are approaching the company already. Sometimes there's a strategic shareholder who will end up buying the company. Sometimes it's a competitor who's aware of the company. Oftentimes it can be a supplier or a customer of the company. We had that recently with one of our legal tech investments that exited to a customer. So that happens. But ultimately, if the founder sort of feels like the time is right, they can go through a traditional process with an investment banking firm and try to find, vet a lot of different potential companies as buyers. So there are a lot of ways that it can go, but the best way and the most common is when it's organic and it just grows out of a pre-existing relationship.
No, that makes sense. So how do you work with an entrepreneur that maybe gets an offer and you think and it's too early? Because I think in some cases, like if you're the hot potato, you kind of need to sell, but you also don't want to sell too early, because there's been so many examples where, I don't know, like a big company will come and say, we'll give you 30 grand for your idea. And you're like, no, I want 3 million. And they're like, it's not going to happen. and then you wait another 6 months or a year, and then you might get, say, 30 million, right? Or I don't know what the number is, but like, how do you know when you're you need to sell before it could potentially you run out of money or go under, or you're not the hot potato anymore? Because I think it happens all the time.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. It's very difficult to figure out when is the right time to sell, because you don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Now, companies that are running out of money, that's not a great time to sell, even though they may feel they need to sell at that time, because that's a desperate time to sell. So you don't want to sell when you're desperate. You want to sell when things are going great.
Growth, so like you don't need to sell.
That's exactly right. Growth is off the charts. You're growing, double digit or more month over month.
Oh, wow.
You're starting to really hit cash flow or get close to cash flow positive. So things are really going well. You're in a big market. You have lots of scalable customer acquisition channels. That's the time to sell. When, but a lot of companies do sell too early. And ultimately, to the first part of your question, it's not my decision as an investor. What we do is we'll advise our portfolio companies. If they ask for advice, we'll provide them with our counsel and our advice on when we think it's the right time or if it's the right time. But ultimately, we're not majority shareholders. It's not our decision. And we respect the decisions of the founders of the company. Sometimes it's a personal reason that they want to get out, and maybe they're feeling burned out themselves, or maybe they just are looking for that exit and they're happy putting, let's say $10 million in their pocket, even though if they wait a few years, they may put 100 million, but they're happy with 10 million and they feel like they want a different challenge. That happens sometimes.
Sure. So if you guys found that once a company sells and then maybe it's their second or their third startup, you're way more likely to invest in them? Or does it really not kind of matter if they're just a first time kind of founder or not?
Oh, no, it absolutely matters. I mean, a proven successful founder we'd much prefer to invest in someone who's had successful exits before. So yeah, absolutely. It doesn't mean we don't invest in first time founders. We absolutely do. But if someone has had, a successful exit or two or three, they obviously know what they're doing. They've learned a lot. They have a lot of experience. They know how to scale a company. And that process is replicable, right? That's a repeatable process applied to a different business. Doesn't always work out, but much better odds with that kind of a founder. So
the thing that I've gotten asked before, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on, is if I'm a founder and I've sold a couple companies and maybe let's hypothetically say I've made enough to retire and I start another company, why would I want to raise more money? Like, wouldn't I just self-fund it? Or maybe a bit of both?
Sure. I mean, it depends. Firstly, it depends on what your goals are.
Okay.
How big a company do you want? If you're content with a modest sized company, or you're content growing more slowly, you can self-fund it.
Okay.
Depends on how much savings you have and how much you're willing to invest and how much capital the company needs. So if the company requires, a few $1 million to scale, to hire the right people, to build out whatever infrastructure, to do the right development, and you only have $500,000 or not even, then you need to raise money.
Sure.
So there are a lot of reasons why you'd want to raise, but I certainly very frequently advise founders not to raise. There are certain types of companies where they don't need to raise, and they probably shouldn't, and they'd be better off retaining 100% of the equity and growing at a more modest pace.
Okay. No, that's kind of what I thought, because it seems like more and more people that I've kind of had on the show that have had a few exits and they could easily fund their own companies.
Yeah.
To still raise money. And people have asked that, and I've kind of wondered that sometimes. It's like, well, why raise money? But it's like sometimes just I guess it's a case-by-case basis a little bit.
Yeah, it is. And also, I mean, there are other benefits that come from raising money, and that is the advice and counsel that you get from the investors. And if they're experienced investors in that field, that can be very beneficial. That can be really helpful. So that's another, beyond the capital, that's another sort of benefit that comes out of it. But yeah, it's a case-by-case basis. We've had some very wealthy founders who've started companies and looked for funding because they just don't want to invest all their eggs in one basket.
Sure.
Maybe they've invested a few $100,000 or even $1 million in this new company, and that's, they have skin in the game, and that's what we look for. But beyond that, they feel like they want to get some other people involved and raise some money at scale.
Sure. So is there a typical amount that you guys would give to a company that are asking for investment? Is it like a couple $1 million? Is it hundreds of thousands of dollars? Is it like $10+ million, or does it really depend?
No, our typical investment amount is like $400,000 to $500,000.
Okay.
And we never know exactly because it's up to our syndicate, right? So
Right.
our syndicate investors each have the opportunity to opt in or opt out of every deal that we present to them.
Okay.
And so if the deal really resonates with them and they're excited about it, they'll invest more. And if it doesn't, they won't invest. So, but typically over the 48 deals we've done, the average has been somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. But Phil, we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So maybe let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and Forefront, and where they can check you guys out online.
Sure. Thank you. ForefrontVP.com is our website. So that's certainly a place to go, ForefrontVP.com, or on AngelList, their website is angel.co. They can look up Forefront Venture Partners. But I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and Medium and everywhere else. So social media.
Perfect, Phil. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time again to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.